My sister abandoned me when Dad was dying and didn't even come to the funeral, but she showed up the second the will was read for the money. Then Aunt Deborah exposed. She spent $300K on a BMW and Europe trips while lying about surgery, and the judge destroyed her with criminal charges. I'm 17 years old, finishing my last year of high school. And what my sister Nicole did to me after our dad died basically showed me that there are people who only think about money, even when they're supposed to be your family. Nicole is 27, like 10 years older than me, and she's always been kind of controlling and dramatic, but I never thought she'd be capable of what she did. I guess I should start from the beginning so you understand all the context, because this story is a total mess, and I need to tell it because my blood still boils when I think about it. My dad started having heart problems when I was in junior year, like midway through the year, and things got bad pretty fast. He'd always been strong, one of those dads who never gets sick, so when he started having chest pains and trouble breathing, we all freaked out. The doctors said his heart was weak, that he needed constant care, expensive medications, and basically bed rest. I tried to help as much as I could, after school. But honestly, it was a lot for just me. I was 16 and didn't even know how his health insurance worked or anything like that. That's when my Aunt Deborah, my dad's sister, moved in with us to help. Deborah has always been amazing, like a second mom to me because my mom died when I was 5. I don't remember much about her, honestly. The thing is, Nicole and Aunt Deborah never got along, not even before all this. Nicole always said Deborah was nosy, that she wanted to control everything, basically just nonsense because Deborah only wanted to help. Nicole lived like 2 hours away from us with her husband, Mitchell, and since she got married like 3 years ago, we barely saw her. Mitchell is a whole other topic. The guy is super arrogant and has some chronic illness. I never really understood what exactly because Nicole always explained it in a dramatic way. But basically, he lives complaining about something. Anyway, when Dad got sick, we told Nicole, obviously, Aunt Deborah, would call her every week to give her updates on how Dad was doing, but Nicole almost never answered, and when she did, she'd say Mitchell was really bad and she couldn't come. It went on like that for about 4 months, with Dad getting worse little by little, and Nicole visited maybe twice. And they were super short visits, like she'd arrive, stay for an hour, and leave saying she had to take care of Mitchell. I was annoyed at the time, but I didn't really understand what that meant. I thought, well, she has her life, her husband is sick too, whatever. But Aunt Deborah was furious. I remember one day after Nicole left without even staying for dinner, she told me, "Your sister is selfish, Samuel. Someday you're going to understand that." And she was right, completely right. Things got really bad in February of this year, my senior year of high school. Dad collapsed in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning. I'd already left for school, but Aunt Deborah was there, thank God. She called the ambulance, and called me around 9 in the morning crying, saying Dad was in the hospital. I ran out of school, didn't even let anyone know properly. Just grabbed my stuff and left. When I got to the hospital, Dad was in intensive care, hooked up to a bunch of machines, and the doctors said his heart was failing, that it was a matter of days, maybe weeks if we were lucky. We told Nicole immediately. Aunt Deborah called her like 5 times until she answered, and when she finally picked up, she just said she'd see if she could come, that Mitchell had just had some kind of crisis or something. Can you believe it? Her dad is dying, and she says she'll see if she can come. 2 weeks went by, 2 whole weeks, and Nicole didn't show up at the hospital once. She didn't call, didn't send messages asking how Dad was, nothing. I was there every day after school. Sometimes I'd sleep in a chair next to his bed, and Aunt Deborah basically lived at that hospital. Dad was conscious some days and would tell me things like, "Take care of yourself, son, study medicine like you want to, be a better person than I was," the kind of things that break your heart because you know he's saying goodbye. My dad died on a Friday night, around 11. I was there, holding his hand, and Aunt Deborah on the other side, and he just stopped breathing. I'll never forget that moment. The way the machines started making that horrible sound, how the nurses came running in, how Aunt Deborah hugged me while I cried. I was 17 years old and had just lost my dad, and all I could think was that Nicole hadn't even come to say goodbye to him. Aunt Deborah called her around 1 in the morning to let her know, and Nicole answered, half asleep, and said something like, "Okay, thanks for letting me know," and hung up. She didn't even sound sad, just annoyed that we woke her up. The funeral was a week later, and guess what? Nicole didn't come to that either. She sent a message the day before, saying Mitchell was too sick to travel and she couldn't leave him alone. I was devastated. I'd just lost my dad. I was trying not to fall apart in front of everyone at the funeral, and my sister didn't even have the decency to show up. Aunt Deborah was furious. I remember that day, she told me. Your dad left everything to you two equally. But she doesn't deserve it. She doesn't deserve anything. I didn't understand what she meant exactly at that moment because we didn't know yet what Dad's will said. The will reading was like 2 weeks after the funeral, at Mr. Hamilton's office, my dad's lawyer. Nicole did show up to that one, obviously, because it was about money. She arrived with Mitchell, who miraculously was well enough to make the 2-hour drive, and she didn't even give me a hug or ask how I was doing. She just sat there with an impatient look, waiting for Mr. Hamilton to start reading. The will was pretty simple. Dad left us everything, split 50 over 50. The house, his savings, his life insurance, everything. It was a considerable amount. I won't say exactly how much, but let's say it was enough to pay for my entire college and have plenty left over. The only condition was that since I was a minor, my part would be under Aunt Deborah's custody until I turned 18, which would be in like 8 months from that moment. Nicole didn't say anything during the reading, but I could see on her face that she was upset about the Aunt Deborah being my custodian thing. When it ended, she grabbed her papers and left without saying goodbye. Mitchell looked at me with contempt. I don't even know why. And they left. Aunt Deborah told me, "She's going to cause problems, Samuel. I know your sister, but I'm going to protect what your dad wanted for you." And again, she was completely right. The first few weeks after that were relatively quiet. I was trying to focus on school, finish the year, apply to colleges, and process the fact that my dad was gone. Aunt Deborah stayed living with me in the house. Technically now the house was half mine and half Nicole's, but Nicole never mentioned anything about selling it or anything. I guess at that moment she didn't care. But like a month and a half after the will reading, Nicole started calling me. At first it was like normal calls, asking me how I was, telling me she missed me. The kind of things that sounded fake because she'd never been like that with me. I played along because, well, she was my sister, and I thought maybe Dad's death had made her reflect or something. But then the calls started to change. Nicole started mentioning that Mitchell needed a super expensive surgery, that they didn't have enough insurance to cover it, that they were desperate. I honestly felt bad, so I asked her how much she needed, and she said like $80,000, an absurd amount. I told her I didn't have access to my inheritance yet, that Aunt Deborah was the custodian, and she said, "Well, then tell Deborah we need the money. It's a medical emergency." I mentioned it to Aunt Deborah, and she said, "First, I want to see proof of that surgery, hospital documents, because I don't trust your sister." Nicole got furious when I asked her for the documents. She started yelling about how dare I doubt her, that Mitchell was dying, that I was selfish just like Aunt Deborah. That's when I realized something weird was going on. I started investigating a little, like looking at Nicole and Mitchell's social media, and I noticed they'd been posting photos of trips, expensive restaurants, Nicole with new designer bags, all that stuff. I mean, if your husband is dying and you need $80,000 for surgery, why are you spending money on vacations and Louis Vuitton bags? It didn't make sense. I showed the photos to Aunt Deborah and she said, "Your sister already spent all her inheritance, Samuel. That's why she wants yours." And she was right. Again. Nicole escalated things after that. She started calling other family members, uncles, cousins, people we barely saw, telling them that Aunt Deborah was manipulating me, that she wouldn't let me use my own money to help my sister in an emergency, that Deborah was a bitter old woman who wanted to keep my inheritance. Some relatives called me asking what was going on, and I had to explain the real situation to them, that Nicole had spent all her money on stupid things and now wanted mine. Most believed me because they knew Nicole and knew how she was, but some took her side, saying family should help each other, and I was too young to understand how medical emergencies worked. But Nicole didn't stop there, obviously not. Like 2 months after all that drama, we received a legal notification. Nicole had filed a petition in court to remove Aunt Deborah as custodian of my inheritance and replace her with herself as my legal guardian. The document said that Aunt Deborah was financially irresponsible, that she was manipulating me against my sister, and that since Nicole was my older sister, and only direct family, she should have control over my money until I turned 18. It was completely ridiculous. Aunt Deborah is an elementary school teacher and has her finances super organized, and Nicole couldn't even manage her own inheritance. But there we were, having to go to court over this. Mr. Hamilton, the lawyer, told us this was going to be an easy case to win, but we still had to take it seriously. We started collecting evidence. Nicole's bank statements showing how she'd spent all her inheritance in 6 months, screenshots of her social media showing all the expensive things she'd bought, recordings of her calls and voicemails where she threatened and insulted me when I didn't give her the money. We had tons of evidence. Basically, Nicole had incriminated herself by being so obvious with her spending and manipulation. The court hearing was like 3 months after we were notified. In June, right when I was finishing high school. I was super nervous because I'd never been in a courtroom, and on top of that, I had to testify against my own sister. Nicole arrived with Mitchell, both dressed very formally, and she was acting all sad and worried, like she really cared about my well-being. Her lawyer started presenting the case saying that Aunt Deborah had alienated Nicole from the family, that she wouldn't let me have contact with my sister, that she was using my inheritance for personal benefit, basically all lies. Then it was Mr. Hamilton's turn, and that's when it got good. He presented Nicole's bank statements, showing that in 6 months she'd spent like $300,000, her entire half of the inheritance, on things like a new car for Mitchell, a brand new BMW, like $70,000, complete remodeling of their house, super expensive furniture, trips to Europe and the Caribbean, designer clothes, jewelry, I mean literally nothing medical. The judge was looking at the documents with a face like he couldn't believe it, and Nicole started getting nervous in her seat. Her lawyer tried to argue that those expenses were necessary for Mitchell's mental health, that the stress of his illness required a certain lifestyle, but it sounded ridiculous even to him. Then Mr. Hamilton played the recordings of the voicemails Nicole had left me. There were like 10 messages where she was yelling at me, calling me selfish, ungrateful, telling me Dad would be disappointed in me, that I was responsible if Mitchell died because I couldn't pay for his surgery. In one of the messages, she literally said, "I'm going to do whatever it takes to get that money, Samuel, even if I have to legally remove Deborah from the picture." I mean, she herself admitted in a voicemail that she was going to try to take custody away from Deborah. There was no way to deny her intentions. Then it was my turn to testify. Mr. Hamilton asked me basic questions about my relationship with Nicole, about how everything had been after Dad's death, about Nicole's attempts to get my money. I told them everything. How Nicole hadn't been present when Dad was sick, how she didn't even come to the funeral, how she started manipulating me to give her money, how she contacted the whole family to turn them against Aunt Deborah. I also explained that I wanted to use my inheritance for college, to study medicine, which was what Dad wanted for me, and that I was afraid that if Nicole got control over the money, she was going to spend it all like she did with hers. Nicole's lawyer tried to make me look bad, asking me if I didn't care that Mitchell was dying, if I had no compassion for my own sister. But I answered that I would care if Mitchell really needed urgent surgery. But I hadn't seen any proof of that. No hospital documents. Nothing. I said, if my sister really needed help with medical expenses, why did she spend $70,000 on a new car? Why did she go on vacation to Italy? He had no answer for that. Nobody did. Aunt Deborah also testified, explaining how she'd taken care of Dad. In his last months while Nicole was absent, how she'd taken on the responsibility of caring for me after his death, how she'd managed my inheritance responsibly without touching a single cent for personal use. She presented her own bank statements, showing she had her own stable savings and didn't need my money for anything. She also presented text messages where Nicole threatened her, said horrible things to her, basically showing who Nicole really was when she didn't get what she wanted. The judge listened to everything, reviewed all the documents, and at the end of the hearing that lasted like 4 hours, took a 30-minute break to review the case. Those 30 minutes were the longest of my life. I was sitting there with Aunt Deborah holding my hand and Nicole on the other side of the room, staring at me with pure hatred. When the judge came back, his verdict was clear and direct. He said Nicole's petition was completely unfounded, that the evidence clearly showed she had wasted her own inheritance irresponsibly, and now wanted access to mine, that Aunt Deborah had proven to be a responsible and trustworthy custodian, and that there was no reason to remove her from that position. Petition denied, case closed. But it didn't end there. The judge also said he was going to refer the case to the district attorney to investigate Nicole for perjury, because she'd lied under oath about several things, and possibly for attempted fraud. Nicole went pale. Her lawyer tried to object, but the judge didn't want to hear anymore. We left the courthouse and I felt relieved, but also weird, because I just won a legal case against my own sister. Nicole caught up with me in the parking lot and yelled that I'd ruined her life, that this was my fault and Deborah's, that Mitchell was going to die because of me. Mitchell also started yelling at me, calling me a selfish brat, and I had to get into Aunt Deborah's car quickly before the situation got uglier. Like 2 months later, in August, we received another legal notification. Nicole had been formally charged with perjury and attempted fraud, and would have to go to another hearing. I didn't have to be present at that one because I'd already testified at the first one, but Mr. Hamilton kept us informed. Turns out Nicole pleaded guilty to avoid a full trial, and the judge fined her like $10,000, put her on probation for 2 years, and ordered her to take financial management classes and therapy. We also got a restraining order, meaning Nicole can't contact me or come near me for 2 years. Now I'm 17. I turn 18 inches like 4 months, and I'm still living with Aunt Deborah in the house that was my dad's. I finished high school with good grades despite all this drama, and I've already applied to several universities to study medicine, and the inheritance is still intact. Aunt Deborah never touched a cent, except to pay for things I needed, like my college applications and that kind of stuff. When I turn 18, I'll have complete control over the money, and I'm going to use it exactly for what Dad wanted, for my education and my future. I haven't heard anything from Nicole since the restraining order. I've heard from other relatives that she and Mitchell moved to another state, that they're living in a tiny apartment because they can't afford more, and that Mitchell is still sick, but there never was any urgent $80,000 surgery. It was all a lie to get my money. Some relatives have told me I should forgive Nicole, that at the end of the day she's my sister and family is important, but honestly, I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive her. She wasn't there when Dad was dying. She didn't come to his funeral. She tried to steal the money he left me for my future. She manipulated me, lied to me, and tried to ruin the only person who really took care of me after his death. How do you forgive something like that? Sometimes I think about what it would have been like if Dad was still here, if he could have seen what Nicole did. I think he would have been incredibly disappointed in her, but I also think maybe he would have seen it coming. Aunt Deborah told me once that Dad had mentioned he was afraid Nicole would be irresponsible with the money. That's why he put Deborah as my custodian, because he knew I was a minor and needed protection. My dad knew me. He knew I was going to use that money responsibly for my future, and that's why he made sure nobody could take it from me, not even my own sister. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to fulfill the dream he had for me. I'm going to study medicine. I'm going to be someone who helps others, and I'm going to prove that his trust in me wasn't in vain. That's all that matters to me now.